Hello and welcome to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez. I am a principal in search of wisdom, and I have found productivity to be a great tool for success. Today, I have the great honor to interview Lindsay Lyons, who is an educational justice coach and host of the Time for Teachership podcast. She helps educators create feminist, anti-racist curricula that challenges, affirms, and inspires all students. Lindsay Lyons, who are you?
Oh, wow. That's a big question. And thank you so much for having me, Dr. Martinez. I'm really happy to be here today. I would say that I am a passionate learner, like really excited to just grow as a human being and be in community with others and learn together. I am definitely like an organizational productivity nerd for sure. And I think also a value of mine that I hold close in all that I do is just to pursue justice for all people and enable everyone to really thrive.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So I'm very curious. Can you walk us through your professional trajectory up to this point?
Yeah, so I it's funny. I was actually a gender and women's studies and sociology dual major. I changed majors like 4 times in college, and that's what I ended up with. I think as most people do.
Mhm.
But then I realized I was going to try to figure out that next step. And I realized that so much of the internship that I was doing, I did an internship with Stop Domestic Violence, which is where my school was located and in college. And it was just very emotionally draining. It was justice work, but it was really hard. And in terms of just like being like kind of having a sense of fulfillment and also being able to be present for my family and my friends, it was not what the work I was cut out for. And so kudos to all of the people who do that work, but it was not for me. And I realized I want to prevent the injustices from happening before they happen instead of trying to kind of help people who have experienced those injustices. So I realized school and education and young people are where that work happens. And so I got into education through an alternative certification program in New York City, New York City Teaching Fellows, and then taught for 7 years in the Bronx and Manhattan and in international schools. So I work with students with IEPs and emerging multilingual learners. And then we moved to Massachusetts for my partner's job. And I was like, I could do another certification or two and get, to be teaching here, or I could use this as a jumping off point. I had just gotten my PhD in leadership and change. And I was like, I think now is the time to really jump into something new and exciting. And so then I started building my own coaching business. And that's what I do now.
So we have something in common because I was in the Chicago Teaching Fellows, also an alternative program.
Amazing.
So tell me, where does this need to work towards justice come from?
That is such a good question. I think a lot of it is reflecting as an adult once I got to college and I was exposed to a lot of just like educational like pieces, right? So learning about diverse identities different from my own, experiences different from my own, learning through both like personal experience and just like connections to people in the world, and then also kind of the academic piece of what is happening and just getting this deeper understanding of what is going on in the world that I was not exposed to so much earlier. It's often coming from a place of this is what I wish it was like for me growing up in education. And I think a lot of teachers come to to that either because they loved education, they want to repeat it the way that their teachers did it for them, or the opposite, kind of like parenting, right? We're like we either do that the way our parents did or we do the total opposite. And so I think that for me was I really want to kind of chance to redo my experience of education, but for all of the people that I help, the teachers to help coach for their students' sake.
I see. And once you become a teacher, at least for me, being an alternative certification meant that I will have very limited student teaching experience. So when
Yes.
I started teaching, it was quite a challenge because the will was there, but the strategies were lacking and missing. What experiences did you have?
Same. Yes, absolutely the same. I felt like there was so much. I think, there's only so much you can do in an alternative certification program where you're just kind of thrown right into the mix. And
Yes.
I think now a lot of the actual professional development that I provide, I structured around this is what I wish that experience was like. So a lot of it centers around how do you connect more with your students in an authentic way? How do you actually design curriculum in a way that enables students to create. So I wore my Create Everyday shirt because I
Oh,
think that it's really important for students to actually create and not just kind of regurgitate information. And doing that is hard. And we're not always taught how to do that in programs, whether it's alternative certification or, typical grad school for teachers. But I think those are the things that I really think we're missing and just would have really enjoyed, but had to kind of figure out on my own.
beautiful. And Steve Jobs said that life only makes sense when you look back and connect the dots. So
That's great.
you're doing gender studies, you do alternative certification, and one day you decide, I'm going to provide professional learning. Can you tell us about, because I'm sure there's people perhaps teaching that are like saying, you know what? I want to be like Lindsay Lyons. I want to provide professional learning. I can do this. I'm very good at this. Can you tell us about that process? What does it look like? What are the glows and grows of that process?
Oh, that's such a good question because the glows and grows, I'll start there. The grow, or kind of the thing that I'm like, ugh, is I miss students. Like, I miss that connection with students so much. And I think most teachers are in it because, like, we just love working with kids. And so that part is totally missing. I think one of the grows for my personal goal for my business is to have a few more student touch points. So one of the things I'm working on now is actually, and we just piloted this at Mass Academy down the road in Worcester, Massachusetts, is actually PDs that bring together students and teachers in teams, and then they co-create civics units together. So we actually have students who are part of the curriculum design process. And I think that is kind of where I'm still finding that. But the glows are, I make my own schedule working for myself, and I get to pursue the things about teaching that I love the most. So for me, it was thinking about ways to connect with students. And so now it's, as a coach, I'm working with so many teachers who have so many different students who have so many different preferences and interests and strengths. So it's how to creatively, right? I love that creation, how to be creative in how do I design something that works for all students, which really at the heart of it is I want to figure out how the process of connecting with students, not necessarily this is what we teach, but like how do we connect with each of our students and have almost like a framework to go into that. So I would say the creativity, the flexibility to make my own schedule. And the way I transitioned was really, there was kind of that abrupt move that kind of made me go full into this. But for 2-3 years beforehand, I actually got the experience as a teacher. I was a department chair, but other than that, I had no formal leadership role, but I still got to facilitate professional development for my staff, and then also at conferences that my school was part of, like these different networks in New York City. So I got to do that and just test it out. And I think that was the best part, is I got to see if I liked it first. And then I started working part-time consulting with organizations when I transitioned. So it wasn't full on start my own business, because that's scary and risky and all the things. And so I liked the entry that I got, like stable work through organizations. And then I got to decide, do I want to go into my own business? So that path worked for me.
Wow. What advice do you have for people who want to begin doing this? What have been some of the lessons you have learned?
Yeah, I would definitely say start with like the stable work where that is present. So if you can get one contract with an organization where you're working, maybe 10 hours a week, 20 hours a week with them, and then you can kind of figure out what it means to work for yourself. There's so many, different lessons that I've learned, like how to schedule my day. For example, when you're a teacher, it's super scheduled and you have all this other stuff you do, but for the most part, it's like you are here from 9:05 to 9:45
Yeah.
or whatever, and then the bell rings and you move on. And so it's a lot of kind of high expectations of what I thought it would be versus the reality. One of the things I have learned is that when you're running your own business, it's a lot of marketing, it's a lot of connections, it's a lot of kind of putting your work out there in a way that I do not feel very skilled at. I am like, the teacher in me is ready to come and help and all the things, and then it's also, you have to pay the bills. So being able to navigate both of those tensions, I think, is the biggest challenge for me. And I would say if someone else is struggling with that, which I've heard a lot of people struggle with that, is to connect with a group. Like Teach Better actually has the Edupreneur group that meets every Thursday, and we get to talk about some of the challenges and how to work through it. And so those connections in those groups and those spaces really have helped me.
So tell us more about this group with Teach Better, where the people get organized and come with different experiences. Because one of perhaps the most difficult things when the teacher is in the classroom, they go outside of the classroom, they realize there's a whole world out there. Can you tell us more about that group?
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point too about like realizing there's the whole world. I think there are ways to do that still while you are a teacher. So actually many people in the group are still teachers and they're kind of experiencing other districts and ways of being in the classroom and ways of doing PD and that kind of thing as almost like a side gig from their full-time teacher job. So I don't think you have to make the full transition. I'll just say that to coaching full time or running your own business before you join something like this. But it's really great. We have different things we do. So we'll do book studies, podcast studies, which are my personal favorite because they're just short. You can listen to something like this on your commute or something. And then you get to go chat about it. And there are often times where I will pick up one thing and then there's, 10 other people in the space and they picked up 10 completely different things. And I'm like, oh, this is brilliant. Like that is where all of the connections come together. And it just makes so much more sense when you can kind of see it through the lens of different people. Sometimes something will click that for years you've like known the thing or whatever the podcast said, but now hearing this different interpretation, it just unlocks a completely different path, which is really cool because as a business owner, you can just follow that path.
Amen. So talking about Teach Better, let's praise them right now. Oh, that should show up. Let's see what's going on. Okay, Teach Better. We meant to praise you right now, but maybe it's not playing, but that's okay. So let me see. Did I mind doing something wrong? This is the good thing about being live that people get to realize, oh, we're human beings too. No, everything
Yes.
is edited. Maybe I should have edited my Chrome. So that's okay. Teach Better. You know we love you. So Lindsay, let me ask you, like in Back to the Future, if you could go back in time for any of the decisions you have held, what is one or two things you would tell yourself differently?
I think that question was going to be if I could go back and change something or tell myself something differently because I've listened to the podcast before, so I think that's what it was. Um, oh, there we go.
That's okay. We're still live. Um, Lindsay, do you hear me?
Yes.
Let's see what is happening here. Relaunch Chrome.
And so I can answer again when he comes back. But I think being able to tell myself that the journey is learning, right? And like making mistakes is part of it. It's part of the fun. It's part of what I love doing. And to just appreciate that along the way as opposed to, um,
Okay, I'm back.
okay.
How are you?
Good, good. I was just
Good.
trying to answer what I think you were asking, so I could go ahead and
I
repeat.
I am so sorry about the boob. I
Yeah.
just updated my Chrome browser. Listeners and viewers of the show, we're still live. Let's see. Let's see if this works. Banners. Let's see. Let's see if we can say thanks to Teach Better.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. Now let's get back to the episode.
Okay, we are back, Lindsay. I'm so sorry for the all the beauty of being live is that we see the actual product rather than the edited one, which has its value too. So, like in Back to the Future, Lindsay, other than this recording, if you can go back in time for any of the positions you have held, what is one or two things you will tell the Lindsay of then?
Mm. I think the very first position I held as an adult, so like after school, after I got my alternative certification, I think I would say, like, it is okay to bring your full self. It is okay to smile before Christmas. That was like an old school, like, don't smile before Christmas that that people would say. And I think another thing is to just really connect and go off script. Like sometimes students are going to learn more when I teach a lesson that I didn't plan and I just go off script. Some of the best lessons that I've had actually were student inspired. And we just kind of went on a discussion tangent that a student had actually shared with me and invited the class to kind of go on that journey with them. And then we just went. And it was honestly one of the most memorable lessons. I'm thinking of one in particular. And that I think that was the best, is just to be able to go on those. So that's the advice that I would give. I think he'll probably come back soon. But yeah, I think just to keep going on this, I think to connect to what I was saying before is like the journey is learning, and I love learning, and learning doesn't just come in academic textbooks.
Well, Lindsay, I don't know. Maybe my internet is going crazy.
Oh, that's okay. I answered the question for people who are watching.
Good. Let me see. Okay. I'm gonna ask you one more time. Maybe the question is kicking us out of the internet. If you can go back in time and advise yourself on with the lessons you have learned with time, what is one advice you would give yourself?
Yeah. So advice more broadly is kind of like enjoy the journey. Like I love learning, and learning doesn't just come in textbooks. And so like the mistakes I make are part of the learning, and people, I'm speaking of gratitude, right? And things that we talk about on the show, like I am so grateful to the people who are willing to let me know when I made a mistake or it could be better, right? I think that's part of it. And a specific moment is just that like very first job, like the very first class that I had. Some of the best lessons I've ever had across my 7 years of teaching were lessons where a student would bring something up and we would go on a tangent and we would just go there because that's where the students in the class wanted to go. And it was beautiful. And I remember it, like years, decades later. And like, I bet our students remember those kind of moments too, not the scripted lesson. So it's okay to go off script, I would say.
Beautiful. Thank you. Great advice. I remember when I started, I thought I had to go point by point. And in fact, at 9:15, I said I was going to do something and I wasn't doing it. I would start freaking out
Yeah.
as if there was someone behind the scenes waiting for me and the lesson plan. That's a great advice. Thank you so much. So, Lindsay, as you know, reading is such a luxury. If you will have to give two books, one fiction, nonfiction, to a loved one, which one would those books be?
That is like the hardest question I've ever been asked, I think, to narrow it to two. Okay. So I would give Children of Blood and Bone, which is the first in the Legacy of Orisha series by Tomi Adeyemi. And it is beautiful. It has all the things that I love. So I realized later in life that I actually really love like fantasy genres. I did not realize, I mean, aside from like Harry Potter or something, I did not realize that I like the genre. And it has rebellion in it, which is like very connected to justice. It has representation of all of the characters and the setting is set in like a fictional version of the continents of Africa. And I think specifically like Nigeria, there's a lot of like Nigerian language that is kind of pulled into the language of Orisha. And I think about this moment where one of my students, I was giving out books at the end of the year, and it was when I was leaving New York. So I was trying to give all my books away. And one student, a Black student, said to me, like, do you have a book that is fantasy and has a character and a bunch of characters who are Black? And I was like, oh my God, like, yes, I have the exact book and I just had finished it. And I was so excited to recommend it. And so I think that kind of thing, like I think about how many students don't even ask that question, but are wanting that thing. And so many of us who are overrepresented in books, like as a white person, it was incredibly important for me to read that book as well. And so that's the fiction book. And then I just also love that it's a series, so you can keep going with the journey. It's not just one book. And so it's kind of a cheating answer. And then the nonfiction book, I would say this is for educators, but also anyone who's connected to education. So I mean, we all have loved ones who are currently kids in education systems, or we went through education systems ourselves. So I would argue it's everyone. But Cultivating Genius by Dr. Goldie Muhammad is just hands down one of my favorite books. I just think it provides this beautiful framework, which again is grounded in Black literary societies and the pursuits that literary societies had historically and then today. So you can kind of trace those 5 pursuits. And I think if those show up in our lessons and we can advocate, if we're parents or, loved ones of people in education right now, we can advocate for those 5 pursuits in their education.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love reading. It's such a truly a luxury. Okay, Lindsay. So who is or who are your biggest influences?
Mm. This is wow, you ask really hard questions. I would say a lot of people. So I think broadly, my family members, my brother, sister, mom, dad, and my immediate family now, my partner James, our child. Like, I mean, they teach me so much on a regular basis. I am just constantly learning, and I'm so grateful to all of their support in doing something like teaching for justice in a climate and culture today where it can be really scary and hard and all the things. Starting my own business, right? That's a risky endeavor. And to have that support from family, like, you can do it, we support you, is just amazing. Colleagues who have done similar work. Dr. Cherie Bridges Patrick is like one of my academic like partners in publishing and writing and creating and brainstorming. And I just, oh my gosh, amazing. I love her. And my colleague Khulud, who I used to share a room with, I just admire her so much for the way that she shows up for kids. And she is pursuing, I guess, did pursue, I think she's finished with the degree now, but she's pursuing some additional education at Teachers College at Columbia for like multilingual learners and really creating space for multilingual learners to thrive and learn in more than one language. And it's just like absolutely beautiful stuff. People that I'm not friends with, but have admired from afar include people like Dr. Goldie Muhammad, Shane Safir, and Jamila Dugan, who wrote Street Data, which is another book. I'm like really cheating here. I'm sneaking in books left and right. But I am like admiring them from afar as well.
Beautiful. So let me ask you, with all these things that you do, you decide to create a podcast. Can you tell us about where was your podcast title, what is it about, and how the idea came up?
Yeah, so it started as a blog actually. I really like writing, and I didn't know that I could do a podcast. I was like, this feels too hard. And so it eventually morphed into a podcast, but it's called Time for Teachership. It has really gone on a journey. Talk about like evolution and learning and all the things. It started as just kind of a general catch-all for all things educational justice. And then I really started focusing on the things that my degree was in, the things where I thought we could have a little bit more leverage was like the leadership and the structures and how do we support teachers in doing this work? Because you could be an individual teacher trying to do some of these things, and it's really hard if you're not part of a larger community of learning. And so how do we help the leaders help the teachers, right? And now this year, I'm really experimenting with this idea. I keep calling it unit dreaming because I don't know what else it could
Ooh.
be, but we actually do. And I'm releasing this in June. There's going to be a series for 2 straight months. All the episodes are going to be where someone comes on and we dream up a unit outline together that advances justice and centers student creation. And so it has been really fun to record those. I think after the series, it's just going to continue. Like, I think the podcast will eventually be like 50% of those episodes.
Wow, and it's so timely because education always has its problems, but now like
Yeah.
where books are being extinguished because
Yeah.
they describe historical accuracy and all that kind of stuff. Have you been able to see that there's a whole crowd out there who wants to make the change in your podcast?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. There are so many people doing great work. And even in places where like the legislation has made it really hard, there are just such brave human beings, both teachers and leaders, who are doing this work. And it is really inspiring. So it's been fun to connect
Wow.
with them.
Wow. What lessons have you learned about podcasting?
Ooh, definitely some productivity lessons in there because it is hard to manage all the pieces. So I've learned to leverage tech tools. So for example, Calendly is a great way to like for anyone doing anything with scheduling. But for me, Calendly is how people sign up because I could say, here's what's available. You click the link and then it automatically sends them the questions and the form and all the logistics. And then I've also realized like it's very helpful for me to be doing batched work. So like every like one Monday a month, I will just batch record all of the episodes because I'm in the podcast space and I can really be thoughtful and I can see how they connect together and everything. And before I was kind of doing it like here or there, but then I paid like the switching cost, I think it's called, of like, oh, I was just writing this chapter and now I'm like switching back over to podcasts and now I'm struggling to get back into the chapter or whatever.
Mm.
So a lot of productivity lessons, I think.
I can't wait to ask you about productivity questions in the next section. But before that, psychologists call imposter syndrome the moment that we feel like, oh, I'm not good enough. That's too difficult for me. I don't think I can do that. How do you address this?
It is so hard. It is so hard for me to address. So I won't say that I do it that well. I'm still learning. But I think the hardest or the biggest impact for me is to think about what is the value that I bring. And even if it's scary for me or I'm feeling like, yeah, I'm having the sense of imposter syndrome, someone else can do this better than me. I think I'm going to show up the best version of myself that I can be. And I'm going to put value into the world. And hopefully that helps someone. And even if it just helps one person, like I did a good thing and it was helpful. And if I get it wrong, which is often in justice work, that's often the thing, right? People are afraid of getting something wrong or making a mistake. Then someone like I have presented myself with an opportunity to learn from someone who is brave enough and willing to help me see that I made a mistake. So I think it can be beneficial if it can be beneficial for me or someone else, it's a win.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. So
Yeah.
let's talk about productivity. As you know, all successful people are very good at their own productivity, but it looks so different for different people. How do you get organized and still have a fructiferous life?
Yeah. So I would say batching is a big one and tech tools, as I said. But addition to that, I would say putting things on the calendar. So I have learned, especially as an entrepreneur where there's less stuff. So teachers and leaders, I know you often have scheduled things that go by the bell. But as an entrepreneur, it is kind of a wide open calendar other than, the clients that I'm working with in real time. So if I have something like record a podcast or type up the show notes or something like that, I'm actually going to put that task in on my calendar. And so I estimate the amount of time that it takes. And I say, okay, this is like 10 to 11 a.m. on Wednesday. This is the task. And that way, I don't have a to-do list. It's always just scheduled events on the calendar and I can move it if I need to, but it's always the time is allocated and I'm not trying to cram too much into one space. I think I also have been trying to focus on like one or two big tasks a day. So working in like, 2 to 3 hour chunks, like what's the morning task, what's an afternoon task, and I try to align those to how my energy is. So the morning I'm usually more creative. The afternoon I usually am energized by like meeting with people or doing some PD work or something like that. And then I would say the other thing is prioritization. So that's been really helpful this year, particularly for me. I actually have like a little sticky note that I have by my desk where number one is wellness for me, particularly this year and this month. So I have a 1-year-old. So the last year has been a little nuts. And it's just like, okay, like what can we do to make sure I'm well so that everyone else is well and I can serve my family well and my clients well and people well. And then it's like, okay, where do I go from there? And so just being able to see that visually every day, like this is first, like, did I go for a run today? Did I skip lunch or did I actually take the time to eat lunch? Is really helpful for me.
Beautiful. A couple of follow-up questions.
Yes.
So, when you transition from the classroom into being an education entrepreneur, uh, was it easy to switch to a no more bells, but you guiding your own schedule? I mean, I can imagine that if I had to start a process like that, oh my goodness, the beginning will be so difficult because I'm so used to, oh, the bell is gonna ring in a
Yeah.
like. Can you tell us about that experience you had?
Yeah, I have to say it wasn't too bad for me. I really enjoyed it. In fact, I remember interviewing for a consulting position at DESE, which is the Department of Education in Massachusetts here. And I remember asking them like, what is a sample schedule? Like, and I was just excited because they were like, a day-to-day schedule changes every day. You're doing something different at 9 a.m. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. It's completely different. And I was so excited. I was like, yeah, I want that. Like, I think I love, the students and a lot of pieces of education, but I was not a fan of the rigidity of like the same thing every day. So I was very in my element and I was very excited to just kind of play around with the possibilities of what it could look like. Cause I felt truly like I was in control of what I could do versus I was being told had to do something.
I see. And do you use what app do you use for calendar, or do you have a manual one?
I just use so I have a Mac. And so I just use the integrated Mac one, which pulls in from Gmail. And so I color code different things. So I have like my business calendar. I have my shared like family personal calendar for like doctor's appointments and things. And then I have like other calendars for like the tasks I was talking about have their own color on the calendar. So that way I can know it's a task and not a meeting. And so it is movable if I need to move it. So color coding is a big one for me.
I see. I see. And you say no checklist? You just put it straight in the calendar?
Yeah, I've tried checklists and sometimes I'll do like priorities for the week. Like I'll be like, okay, here are like the 2 or 3 big things that I need to do for the week. But that's about it. If it's on paper, usually it just gets lost in the shuffle.
That sounds good. And do you take notes during the day, or is it all in your head? Like, what is that process of uh, getting together your thoughts?
I have been experimenting for, I think, decades with how that will work. So from college onto like as a teacher onto now grad school, I have tried probably like 15 different approaches. I've tried like Evernote, Google Docs, paper, color coded notebooks, like all the things. Now, lately, I have been trying to house most things in Google Docs that are kind of relevant to like a certain area. But I also have, there's that like on a Mac, there's like that pop up quick notes. I think it's like the notes app that
Yes.
syncs with your phone, and I just find myself like that's so easy, and then it's typed up and I don't lose it in paper. I just have like this one very long running document with like a year of notes on it, and I'm like, well, I'll just like use the search function to find what I need, and it is sustaining me so far, but I'm still working on that.
Cool, cool. And you mentioned you did a doctoral degree.
Yeah, yep.
What experiences did you learn in terms of getting the thing done? And what were your lessons?
Yep. So I did my PhD in 3 years while I was teaching full time. So it was like, it just forced me to be like, you have to get things done quickly and efficiently, and you don't have time to mess around. Now, like the reason I was able to do that is because my partner was also in a full time PhD program at the time. So, like, we both had the understanding of like, we're just not really going to see each other for the next couple years. Like, here we go. And so most of the time it was Saturday, Sunday, full 8, 9 hour days, just like working and just structuring my day, just like I do now with like the tasks, but it was all PhD focused, which also meant that I had to figure out a way to not bring work home from school. So I had to figure
Mm.
out a lot of that. Like, we can't do grading at home anymore. Like, how do I give formative in the moment feedback to students or things like that? And then I think also, like, I didn't have a kid at the time. We didn't have a dog at the time, like all of these other things that really take up your attention. So I think like that really made it possible for me. So I don't think that I would say that it is possible for everyone, because now having a kid and a dog, I'm like, that would be very challenging. But
Absolutely.
I do think that routine helped. And I would literally motivate myself by, there was a cafe down the road. We lived in Queens at the time, and it was so good. They made like a really good cappuccino, and they had like this really good croissant. And I would just go and I would get those 2 things every morning. And then I would sit down with my computer and I'm like, it's go time. And so then I would just write.
And what lessons have you learned being a new parent?
Oh gosh, so many lessons. In fact, I think people who are subscribed to my email this week will get a very interesting email about one of those lessons. And so I'm not sure how appropriate it is to share here because it involves diaper changes, but I think
It is appropriate.
okay, great. So I would say like that I'm very excited to share this. So one of the big things I've learned recently is my child does not like to lay down and have his diaper changed. Just not a fan. So we went to the doctor and I was like, doctor, like this is a challenge. Like it is, like he's rolling around. Like I don't want to hold him still. Like I don't want to like force it. Like, how do I do this? And he's like, well, you have to learn the art of changing a diaper while standing up. And I was like,
Mm.
what? Like I have to do it. Like that's a thing people do. And so then I realized like I had this idea in my head that I had to do things this certain way because that's how I've always seen them done. And like I thought this was the way. And we do that so much in life. We have to, like, it should be this way, or everyone else does it this way, or we think they do it this way and they really don't. And I realized like after switching the last few weeks to like this new approach of like, all right, well, yeah, he likes standing now. Like, let's just try this. So much better. Like my relationship with him is better. I feel less stress. We get the thing done. And it was just like this big aha moment of like, it's not always going to look like you think that it should, but as long as you really prioritize what is important in that relationship and the connection, like it's going to be okay. Even if we make a mess, it's going to be okay. Right? Like what is important is that human connection and that we're learning and growing together, and we don't lose sight of that. So that has been a huge lesson for me.
Beautiful. I remember one time I had to do that. We went to a public washroom and there was no diaper changing. So
Oh,
I took out my jacket and put it on the floor. And I said, buddy, hold from me because your diaper is going to be changed standing up. And it was not the best diaper change, but it worked. Uh, so yeah, I can feel identify with that. So Lindsay, you mentioned you go for runs.
Yes, yeah.
So tell us about what you do for exercise.
Yeah, so I was an athlete growing up. My dad coached softball and basketball. So I was always into softball and basketball, played until I broke my arm my senior year. And so it was like this big buildup of like, senior year is going to be the best. And then I was like, just kidding. So I had to learn how to do a different form of exercise because I didn't just break it. It was like it was an issue that basically was like a year long in a cast
Wow.
situation. Yeah, so I had to really figure out like, okay, I'm never gonna pitch again. I was a softball pitcher, and like basketball, it's probably gonna take maybe another year after I get out of the cast to really like get back into that. And it was in college, so I was like, I'm not gonna play in college, and so I had to really figure out what does it look like to be fit, and I had this identity of like a team sports person, and now I'm kind of trying to figure out an individual path. And so it became running. Like running was something I didn't need to use my arm for, so I could do it a little easier sooner. And then I just started challenging myself and to try to see how far I could run. And before I knew it, I had run a marathon and it didn't go quite as well as I wanted. So I ran another one and then that didn't go quite as well. So I ran another one. And so then I was just like, wow, this is like a really cool way to not only challenge myself, but also be like a stress relief. Like it's really exciting. As a parent, I don't have time to do marathon training. But the other day, I just ran like a 15-minute short, as fast as I could run. And I was like, oh, I feel recharged, or I got out a lot of like the stress or whatever. And it's really cool because you can make running as long or as short or as hard or as relaxing as you need to. And it's totally like, on your own schedule. It doesn't cost a lot of money. You just need some shoes. And so that I think has been really great and very freeing for me.
Beautiful. And when the curtains close and you are not consulting and supporting teachers, podcasting, what do you do for fun?
Wow, that is also a hard question because I struggle with fun. I think I struggle to relax sometimes because I am so good at productivity. Sometimes it's hard to go to the other side and just be completely unproductive. I always try to find like the productivity in things. So I was just having this conversation last night with my partner, and I was like, I need some more fun. Usually, what it is it's books, and I read books, mostly fiction for fun. Nonfiction is still interesting, but a little less fun. So sometimes it's hard though because fantasy books are like maybe 1,000 pages, and it's like this is a commitment. And so I'm like, I need something that's like a little shorter than that. And so one of the things that I really enjoyed doing in the last few years, just as a parent, and I would use a breast pump and stuff to feed my kid. And so that was an activity where I had to sit by myself for 15, 30 minutes multiple times a day, and was like, what am I going to do for this short period of time? I would use New York Times crossword books and I would just do
Mm.
those. And they're very hard, but I at least feel like I am productive in the sense that I'm learning something and I'm trying. And so I would say that is another piece that I'm starting to try to get back into.
That I love that you learn so many words and your brain is
Yeah.
thinking. It's amazing. Lately, I removed social media from my phone, so my phone is now
Brilliant.
boring, and added crossword puzzles and that kind of stuff. And when I'm in line now, I'm looking for words instead of like scrolling. And it has
That's
been great
brilliant.
for mental health. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Lindsay, this has been such an interesting conversation. Besides the internet issues, um, is there any last words for the listeners or viewers of the show you would like to share?
Yeah, I think one of the things I was thinking back on, the question of influence, I am also very influenced. I didn't say this, but I am very influenced by the students in my life, the students I've had the honor to teach. And like, I think the most that I've learned about being an educator and being human too, honestly, is from them and not from any sort of course that I took or, advice from like a higher up. Those are important, but the big things I learned from students. So I just want to say that, I'm super grateful to students, and I'm super grateful for the people who reach out and connect and offer me, as I was saying, like those pieces of wisdom or those ideas of like, oh, you did this, maybe try considering this as well. Just like those suggestions and kind of being willing to extend an idea to me when like it's scary to do that. You don't know how I'm going to receive something and you're willing to do that. Like I appreciate people who do that so much.
Beautiful. Lindsay, I love your enthusiasm and your energy. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, lindsaybethlyons.com is my website, and then it'll link to all the things, the blog and podcast and everything. Twitter, I think, is the only one that's not Lindsay Beth Lyons. It's Lindsay B. Lyons because it's a little
Yes.
shorter requirement. So yeah,
Yes.
Time for Teachership podcast is if anyone wants to be a guest and do a unit dreaming with me, I'd love to have you.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Last question, I promise. The title of your podcast, Teachership.
Yes.
For me, it was like, did she mean leadership? Like, how did that title come up?
Yes. So I don't know if people will believe me, but I came up with it in my head. And then I was like, I wonder if this is something else like that already exists. Because I thought, yeah, teaching and leadership, like this intersection. And I Googled it, and it was like literally the year before I had thought of it. Someone had published an article where they had defined it as an actual construct where teaching intersects with leadership. And they described it as teachers are given opportunities to lead in their schools and communities. And so they are seen as leaders, but also the leaders are in the classrooms and deeply connected to what is going on in each classroom and the instruction happening there. So I was just like, yes, this is what teaching should be and leading should be. And so, yeah, I can't take credit for that.
Hey, whatever works. Thank you for making the difference. And I hope that you enjoy the Sunday.
Thank you so much. This was a pleasure, Dr. Martinez.
Amazing. Take care. Peace and calm.
Thank you for listening to Wisdom and Productivity, the podcast of Dr. Efraín Martinez.
Chulo.
And I love that production. Chill out.